A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back once again to Video Games That Are Totally Awesome. So, on this good old Thursday, what I got to talk about for this instance in Video Games That Are Totally Awesome will in fact be, let's just say, a couple of Simpsons games. Yeah, there were a couple in particular that we remember playing a pretty long time ago, especially during the days of the PS2 and Xbox 2001. The thing is that The Simpsons had crossed over to a lot of different gaming ports as well as consoles. Especially in the olden days when the show was first becoming popular with its first 3 or 4 seasons, you had such platforms like the NES, Sega Master System, Game Boy, Game Gear, and various arcades, which unfortunately never quite panned out to be released on 16-bit consoles. One would imagine that that's exactly what it should have done, but instead the best they were able to do back then was to port the Simpsons arcade beat 'em up, that is, on Commodore 64 and DOS. That's pretty much it. For shame. But not to worry, because there actually have been more recent ROMs that were able to fully reestablish the old arcade tradition that happened way back in the day. Amongst that, though, 2 particular Simpsons titles that I've remembered, one of which was known as Simpsons Road Rage. First released in 2001 amongst the PS2, being one of the earliest releases on the PS2, that is. The game centers around Bart Simpson at home, trying to play some games until Homer steps in and tunes the TV to the news. Yeah, by changing the channel to the news, the Simpsons themselves basically learned that Montgomery Monty Burns, Homer's boss at the nuclear power plant, is basically establishing radioactive buses. Yeah, buses powered by radiation. One would have to wonder if that's actually safe. Just think about it. We're practically frying up our own brains by utilizing these monstrosities. While there are efforts in a means to counteract the large amounts of EMF rays that are constantly wiping through our brains and bodies, I guess one cannot imagine the life of a radioactive bus. The thing is, though, is that after some discussion takes place, Homer comes up with a brilliant idea to start his own driving share. Basically like that of a rideshare service, but this was way back in the day, when taxis were still in full swing, even outside of most major cities like New York and Cleveland, Ohio. The thing is that The Simpsons Road Rage, there's actually one particular notion that most people seem to reminisce. A couple years earlier, there was a popular arcade game called Crazy Taxi. In that game, it centers around you driving around the city, picking up folks, and dropping them off to their destinations before the clock runs out. You get bonus time depending on how well your performance was, and also how quick you make it to your final destination. The unique challenge of getting there as quickly as possible and as safely as possible to get a hold of the bonus time marks will actually live on in the memories of a lot of people. The Simpsons Road Rage is, you guessed it, little more than that type of format. It starts off with any character that you can pick from, but only a few are unlocked at the moment. The more of the game that you play through, the more characters you unlock, as well as new locales and other such stuff becomes available. While there's not exactly much of a story that unfolds, there is certainly a lot of variety in characters, in settings, and of course, in challenge. Because depending on where you go, and depending on whom you decide to pick up, the game doesn't exactly make a current mandatory status as to whom you should pick up first. It doesn't exactly give you all that sort of directions. It's just up to you to find out whom to find, which can easily be made available by looking at a blue force field, basically. Whenever there's a person standing on the side of the road with one of these force fields hovering around them, that's how you know that you're supposed to go pick them up. And they will let you know where you need to go. A pointing finger, which is in placement of Crazy Taxi's arrow, will basically point in the precise direction you need to go in order to drop off said character whether it could be Ned Flanders or Otto, the school bus driver, or Reverend Lovejoy, or even Miss Krabappel. The thing is that there's a ton of different characters out there, not just to drive around with, but to also pick up. The thing is, depending on whom you select, every one of the other characters is basically your pickup and predestined passengers that you need to get to their destination safely, on time, and as quickly as possible. For example, if you were to play as Homer, he will of course make his appearance in his trademark pink 86 Plymouth, which of course, canonically speaking, is referred to as the Plymouth Junkalore, or even just simply put, the Simpsons family car, as most would put it. And while it's probably true that the car itself was inspired by an actual 86 Plymouth, the thing is, that's what Homer drives around with. Marge, of course, has her own car known as the Canyonero, which of course was directly inspired by the episode in which that she buys a four-wheel drive SUV and cuts through some terrain off of the highway just to get back home on time. And as for most of the other characters, you have Lisa Simpson with an EV, Bart Simpson with a space shuttle inspired box racer, and you even have, get this, Groundskeeper Willie in his tractor. So you could say they got pretty creative with the boundaries as well as the loads of characters, and they practically knew about how the show went down and what cars belonged to which character. Depending on whom you pick, you will definitely get a good execution. There's even Mr. Plow, wouldn't you know? And I will say that the way that you hover above the characters, every one of them has their own little animation. You have Homer Simpson crashing into place. You have Bart Simpson flying in, as the soapbox racer is indeed inspired by the space shuttle. You have Lisa coming in with the EV, unplugging from the wall, as if the card needs to be plugged in the whole time. So that's quite an insinuation. And as for everybody else, they have their own unique animation intro segments, if you will, letting you know that depending on whom you choose, you will in fact get what you're looking for. The one thing that I feel like is a missed opportunity in that field, though, is that any of the characters could have had their own special abilities. Like, we know that Homer has had his Plymouth modified in different ways, as well as some instances of him using that one car of his for a variety of different reasons. But no, all it does is it basically just acts like his normal everyday drive, in a way. While it's not as crazy as before, The Simpsons Road Rage still does offer lots of variety and also lots of excitement. The main challenge, of course, is getting everybody there on time before the clock runs out. And even when the clock does run out, fear not, the game's not exactly over. No, what happens is that the score gets registered. Of course, because this is inspired more or less by a popular arcade game that came out 2 years prior, they have to put out scoreboards out there. And more so, Krusty the Clown makes an appearance. He basically gives you a rating based on how good your performance was, and it could be anything from weak to insane, depending on what your score is like. And of course, even that's not over. There has to be a moment in where Monty Burns himself makes an appearance as well. So, to put it simply, when the clock does finally run out, the game is not exactly over. The score is measured out, Krusty gives you a rating, and then Monty Burns shows up with a small message. Typically in relation to the fact that this attempted sabotage of his nuclear bus operations, and claiming that Springfield is basically a transit town. It really goes to show that Burns seemingly is quite the antagonist in the show. I mean, it was one thing where he's utilizing nuclear power as a means to secure a lot of profits and also make a lot of shrewd business practices, the likes that even Mr. Krabs has taken a few notes in his notebook. So, I guess you could say that between both shows, they have similar things going down, in which that there is a secret bad guy in the works, in which that one of the main protagonists is actually working for. So, I almost wonder why SpongeBob doesn't have anything like this, considering that it and The Simpsons are very much alike in nature. But I guess we don't really have to go into that sort of field. The bottom line, though, is that every single gameplay that you put together here, every playthrough that's pieced together, it's basically the same sort of thing. You start with the clock running down as Monty basically teases you, and occasionally you will bump into him in his limo driven by Waylon, or you could even bump into the bus itself, as the bus does sometimes try to knock you off and try to sabotage your operations. So those are the only real instances in which that you might have enemies trying to take you down. There's no health bar or anything. All it just does is just slow you down or even put you in a crawl, which sometimes can be a bit annoying because you're trying so hard to beat the clock and get to your next client. So overall, I will say that the many characters that you pick from Homer Simpson to Reverend Lovejoy, from the locations that you go through, including the Simpsons' own neighborhood, to the nuclear power plant, and even the gorge. Yes, said gorge in which that nobody could make it through to the other side. Yeah, that's a lot of instances in which that had happened. We have yet to truly see if anybody can make it over there. But I will say, I've still had a lot of fond memories of this over the years. The idea of smashing things up, getting people to their destinations on time, and of course, taking down a corporate radioactive man, if you will. It's quite a unique operation to go through. The fact that Lisa practically inspired Homer and Homer practically inspired Lisa in both ways that you could probably imagine, they've both been able to basically curate a good amount of money. I really wonder though, could a story actually unveil with something like this? The more money you get, I feel like what could happen is that you could spend it on a potential amount of upgrades or even go through a progression system. But the real big thing that happens here is that you unlock characters and locations and some other stuff as well. Some collectibles are also visible in here as well. So overall, you don't exactly get much of, let's say, a storyboard, or even more so, much of a true ending where Monty is defeated and, well, his bus operations have grinded to a halt. But still, a lot of us find some good nostalgia with a title like this. But, wouldn't you know, 2 years later, The Simpsons would actually come back even better with a follow-up, thanks to the success that Road Rage had put together within only 2 years after its release in 2001. But I will talk a bit more about that later. For now though, The Simpsons Road Rage is a good arcade game, thoroughly inspired or even ripped off Crazy Taxi, depending on which way you look at it. And for all the things that I'd find about this title, I will go ahead and give it a somewhat generous scoring of 8.8 out of 10.1. It might be a bit high for some people, but the big fond memories of this title sure have never been lost. And that's why I would be more than proud to represent this game in this series, much more so than what most would imagine. In any case though, tomorrow I'm going to bring up the other PS2 Simpsons game that I've remembered very fondly over the years, known as The Simpsons Hit and Run.